समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Welcome to the Worldview with Swasti. Today we turn to India's western neighbor and to a strategically vital territory that India claims as its own. That is the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, comprising what Pakistan administers as Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, in recent weeks, this little understood region has witnessed extraordinary unrest. At its center is the Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee, or the JAAC, a civil society coalition formed in 2023 that initially mobilized around electricity tariffs, wheat subsidies, and local control over resources, but now also demands the abolition or restructuring of the 12 assembly seats reserved for refugees living elsewhere in Pakistan, arguing that they dilute the democratic representation of the territory's residents. Now, the scale of the crackdown by Pakistan's security apparatus and the reported loss of lives has been deeply disturbing. I'm sure you have seen the images, the videos that are coming off and on, on the internet. And despite its immense importance to India, Pakistan, and China, its location along the CPEC corridor and its critical water and hydropower resources, this region remains one of the world's least understood. Now, to help us understand its history, politics, strategic significance in their full breadth and depth, I'm pleased to welcome Wajahat Saeed Khan, the renowned Pakistani journalist now based in the United States. Now, Wajahat is no stranger to ThePrint. He has appeared on ThePrint before and needs no introduction to our audience, especially for his incisive work on Pakistan's politics, military, and statecraft. He joins me today from New York. Wajahat, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Swasti. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you. And what a fantastic introduction. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's just start with where things are. Let's help us establish the facts. You just told me that, you've been doing some work on it. Can you just independently also verify about the killings and what is going on? Yes, the floor is yours.
All right. So to give you a situation report, or as the Pakistan Army calls it, the sitrep on the ground, this is where we're at. Broadly, the elections are kind of on standby. We aren't clear. The elections, however, we must all be very, very clear that the elections were not the cause of the violence. What was the cause of the violence is a larger issue. Now, the Azad Kashmir, which obviously is not very Azad, or let's just call it for now, Pakistani administered Kashmir. I'm not going to call it Pakistan-occupied Kashmir because that creates a whole other debate between an Indian and a Pakistani, and I'm not in the mood to debate, only report. The Pakistan-administered Kashmir right now is basically, you can say for all effective purposes, in some sort of martial law, practically speaking. Now, what does that mean? The classic tenets of martial law are transportation is limited, links are cut off, the internet is out, media is not being allowed, phone services are done for. Now, how did this all start? Not 2 days ago when the elections were. Now, keep in mind that Azad or Pakistan-administered Kashmir has about a 50-seat legislature. And 10 of those seats are reserved. The rest are contested. The Joint Awami Action Committee, for short, we call it JAAC. Now, JAAC is not a political party, which is the bane of the Pakistani establishment's resistance right now. And maybe that's the problem, because it represents a wide coalition of shopkeepers, lawyers, civil society activists, small zamindars, small farmers, and concerned citizens. And they started getting organized a couple of years ago when there was a little bit of a political engineering in the wake of Imran Khan, the former Pakistani Prime Minister's ouster. Now, we all have studied the Khan phenomena, and we all know how in mainland Pakistan, Khan has been imprisoned and his party has been dismantled. And in fact, thousands of PTI supporters, including Khan, are incarcerated. But the connection to Azad Kashmir is a little different because the Azad Kashmir government, till right around the time Khan was in power in the center in Islamabad, the Azad Kashmir government, the Pakistan-administered Kashmir government, which is a separate parallel entity, which really is a client of Islamabad, but pretends to function autonomously, was also a PTI government. They had their own prime minister. He was a PTI member, and it was a very powerful PTI government. And much like the center, where the military-led establishment engineered the ouster of Khan by engineering a vote of no confidence in the center, much like that, the Prime Minister of Azad Jammu and Kashmir was also ousted a few months after Khan. So there was already tumult in mainland Pakistan, but there was also political engineering in Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Now, this is quite common, and the Pakistanis are quite used to engineering and have been for decades. But that's not the point here. The point is, while just like mainland Pakistan behaved differently with Imran Khan's ouster because of what Khan represented, his message, his support base, just like that, Azad Kashmir responded in a different way as well. But this time, the PTI didn't respond. Khan's party in Azad Kashmir wasn't the main perpetrator of change. It was actually a coalition, as I said, of traders, dukandars, zamindars, small farmers, engineers, students, the JAAC. Now, why did they form? Because that is the sort of freedom and that is the sort of concern that is allowed in Kashmir. Political parties are not as organized as actual student and trading groups. And a couple of years ago, they came up with small protests and then effectively a demand, 38 demands. Most of those demands were administrative, better funding, better schools, more scholarships, more access, more bijli, more pani, more gas, the usual. But a couple of those demands were quite interesting. One of those demands, which is the bane of everybody's concern right now, is 12 Muhajir seats. Now, Muhajir is Urdu for immigrant. Now, as you know, Pakistan is built up of a wide variety of immigrants. There's immigrants who came to Karachi, the city I'm from, who primarily came from the UP and Delhi, where you are at currently. There's immigrants who came from the Punjab, who primarily settled in the Pakistani Punjab, in Lahore and thereabouts. But there was also a wave of immigrants who came from Kashmir after the first Kashmir War of 47-48. And they crossed over. And they were given special stipulation when Azad Kashmir was granted its autonomous or semi-autonomous status. And then they were given representation in the state legislature. Now, the problem is, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when wars were fresh and immigrants from across, from Indian-administered Kashmir were also fresh and in huge numbers, that adjustment made sense. But now, 3 generations later, with the demographics having effectively changed permanently, and no Muhajirs coming anytime soon from India, sure, there's infiltration, sure, that happens, but infiltrators are not Muhajirs, and most of the infiltration happens the other way anyways. So premised on that, it doesn't make sense on paper to have a good quarter of the legislature booked out for Muhajirs. Now, is the JAAC anti-Muhajir? No. The JAAC knows that the Muhajir seats are basically tool for Islamabad, or frankly Rawalpindi, the home of the army, to engineer and basically puppet master the state assembly. Those 12 seats are how they put their favorite candidates in, and how they basically run the machine from sitting far away in Rawalpindi. Now, that was one gripe where JAAC said, no, let's have fair elections for everyone, no affirmative action, no special quotas, nothing. Normal people should be allowed to run, not Islamabad or Rawalpindi's favorite boys and girls, right? Mostly boys, unfortunately. Secondly, even more importantly, another gain that they wanted was actually a loss. They wanted to lose, or rather, they wanted their ministers. And yes, cabinet, there's a whole cabinet there. There's 30-something ministers in Azad Kashmir, believe it or not. 30-something. And they wanted these men, mostly men, to cut down on their limousines, on their armored cars, on their guards, on their free electricity, on their free phones, on their many servants. As you well know, and as we have seen, the Pakistani elite, whether it's military or political, really likes to live large. The Indian Army chief drives officially a Maruti. The Pakistan Army chief drives officially a Maybach. That's where it starts, and that's where it goes. So because of that culture of elitism, there was pushback there. And they decided that, listen, we are the people. We don't think that these guys should have free phones, free servants, free gadi, free bijli, free pani, free gas, free falana, right? And they effectively, that was the second point. And the third point was to implement everything together. So out of 38 points, 35 were accepted, but these 3 were not accepted. And that's where the new wave of protests started in, I guess you can say, preparation for this day, for the elections.
Yeah.
They wanted, early June is when they started, and they thought that they'd make some noise. Unfortunately, their noise has ended up with last month, them being prescribed, just like Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed is prescribed in India. Just like that, JAAC is prescribed in Pakistan. It's a terrorist organization. So they're saying now, the official narrative from the government is, despite 2 years of negotiations, they're saying, oh, these guys are raw-funded Indian terrorists. So I find it ironic that, and that's why we're killing them. Because I find it ironic that for 2 years, the Pakistani government and the state has negotiated with these men and women, mostly men, but these Kashmiri citizens. But all of a sudden, in the last month before the election, they find them to be Indian agents. I find it ironic. I find it sad. And frankly, nobody believes it.
Right. Now, Wajahat, that was quite a stunning sort of a run through of what is going on, and it's deeply disturbing, of course. So, I mean, to also help us understand the numbers. I mean, since 27 July, what is the number? There was an internet blackout, so one doesn't know, but different reports have cited different numbers. Is it like dozens of people? Where exactly is it? The Pakistani state narrative obviously is underplaying that, which is understandable. But what is the reality in your opinion?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the how many and the where. So there's 10 districts in Kashmir, right? Mm-hmm. And these are the lower districts. Right? And that's where this action has mostly started from, but now it is slowly spreading and escalating. Firstly, number 1, in Poonch, etc., around there. Yeah. Down, Mirpur, Poonch. Right, number 1. Number 2, yesterday, the first major number was 19. That happened on the main highway towards Rawalakot. It was one incident, but then there's been multiple incidents. And right now, the overall number, according to now several independent journalists on the ground, as well as drop site news here in the US, is 35. That estimate is only for those killed. There's been upwards of 200 people injured. There's also been at least one Pakistani paramilitary ranger who has been killed, and Azad Jammu and Kashmir police claims that the JAAC folks have automatic weapons, and they've just done their own press conference regarding that. Meanwhile, JAAC had last produced a list of at least 19 people who were killed, along with their locations and lineage and residences, and are also saying that they will be releasing a report of the fresh list of people who have been killed. Unfortunately, the problem is that bodies, and there's evidence of this out there, dead bodies, corpses lying on the streets have been removed.
Yes.
They've gone missing. And there is also evidence of these bodies being removed by security personnel. That's not their job, but they're doing it. So corpses are being disappeared to perhaps, I have a feeling they weren't taking them to hospitals. I have a, so, and most importantly, hospitals have also been used as both ambush points to arrest and shoot at more people, as well as entry to hospitals for many of the wounded has been denied, where many of them have languished, not on the street where they were shot, but outside those hospitals. They weren't allowed inside. They weren't given treatment like civilians. And the defense has been that they are a prescribed India-backed terrorist group. That's that's their defense.
Yeah. You mentioned that, and it's deeply disturbing. I mean, to see a state turn against its own people, the manner in which it's happening in Pakistan. But before I go ahead, Wajahat, could you also help the Indian audiences understand the difference? Because the Azad Jammu and Kashmir, the region that you refer to, and Gilgit-Baltistan, there's also difference in terms of, the ethnicity, and also, I believe, Gilgit-Baltistan, especially, I think Gilgit region is where you have more Shia people. So is there also this angle out there, and could you help us understand, the demographics of it?
So Azad Kashmir and GB, historically, Gilgit-Baltistan were pretty much the same under United Kashmir or Princely State Kashmir under Maharaja Hari Singh, the Dogra ruler. But obviously, I mean, Kashmir is a large region at that time, and there's the valley, which India administers today. There is this side, the western side, much of which is in Pakistan, and then there's the northwestern side, which is more towards the Himalayas and the Karakoram range, very mountainous in a very different way. Now, yes, the ethnicities in Gilgit-Baltistan are different. There's a different sectarian makeup as well, while most Kashmiris are Sufi or Sunni Muslim in the valley and in the hills of the valley, which Pakistan possesses. In the mountains, most people are Shia. There's a lot of Agha Khanis or Ismailis there. There's also completely different languages. The valley's Kashmiri language is very different from the hill, meaning the Pakistani Kashmir's Pahari language. And the Pahari language is very different from the languages which are indigenous to Gilgit-Baltistan. But this is not just about language and Shia or Sunni or Sufi or whatever. This is also, you're talking about everything. You're talking about education rates, which are very high, the highest education rates in Pakistan. In fact, almost 99% in certain villages are in Gilgit-Baltistan, believe it or not. It's a very different kind of culture, perhaps because they're very isolated from the rest of Pakistan. And they've got their own thing going on, very peaceful, very relaxed, and quite different. They've had a different lineage, a different history. Very, very, however, the Gilgit-Baltistani culture and the Kashmiri culture was also divided by their way of ruling themselves. They had their own little kingdom within the Dogra kingdom, and we saw a bit of that come to action. Now, to answer your question, why is this important to us? Well, firstly, your defense minister claims that he's going to take all of PoK, and then he's also explained a couple of years ago that he's going to take Gilgit-Baltistan as well. Now, that really raised alarms in Pakistan because the Indians have for decades claimed Kashmir, but no Indian leader, at least to my knowledge, has claimed Gilgit-Baltistan. And I thought that was quite fun to observe that Rajnath Singh knows where Chitral is because that's and Skardu is, because that's where Gilgit-Baltistan is. But interestingly, Gilgit-Baltistan is also where the Pakistan Army chief has served. Gilgit-Baltistan is also where the Siachen Glacier resides. Gilgit-Baltistan is also where both the militaries of India and Pakistan have faced off on the world's highest battlefield since 1984 and Operation Mehdut. So there's a lot on Gilgit-Baltistan which is strategically important. Less population, less politically popular than the Kashmir divide, right? We sort of like do the Jammu Kashmir, but yeah, it's a big, huge geographic chunk, strategically important and politically different. They have their own set of semi-autonomous constitutional rules. They don't have a constitution. Azad Kashmir has a constitution because for diplomatic reasons, decades ago, Pakistan decided that Gilgit-Baltistan should not have its own independent constitution. Now they do have elections there, but they are sort of jerry-rigged to be supplementary to Pakistan's elections. Azad Kashmir, meanwhile, has its own prime minister, has its own president, has its own cabinet, has its own flag, and technically, believe it or not, they even have their own army, which is Pakistan Army soldiers, but they don't wear the formation signs or the regimental signs. They call them Mujahid Force. It's quite funny because they're the same guys as the unit next to them, which is the Pakistan Army unit, but they don't wear the div patches. It's funny.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was all right. I mean, I'm also smiling to myself for so many things that you said. Okay. Before we go ahead, you mentioned everything. You mentioned all the root causes basically on which there is so much contestation. But there's also water, right? And I think water, electricity, hydropower, that also has sort of come in the center of this discussion. So help the viewers understand, something about that, the hydropower capacity, the demand, who dispatches it, who owns it, etc. Is there a problem with regard to that?
That's the key to why this is all strategically important. Do you think that the Pakistani state or the Pakistani military cares about the welfare of the normal folks, the regular folks up in the mountains? No. They've been isolated for years. Despite the isolation, they've managed to take care of themselves, run a pretty decent tourist economy. They're pretty self-subsistent. Even though they're cut off, they're quite happy, very peaceful. But the main problem is that they've been underdeveloped chronically. So no, the Pakistani state has no love lost for the people in the peripheries, whether they're in Gilgit-Baltistan or Balochistan or the KP, all peripheral provinces. The main importance is that many of the waterworks, the headworks, while they emanate from India, run through these two areas, Kashmir and mostly even Gilgit-Baltistan. And because of that strategic importance, those waterways, which are the life source of Pakistan, still an agrarian country, 45% of the GDP is still premised on agriculture. Protecting those waterways and making sure they're okay. And thus they have developed parts of those areas, but they made dams, for example. They're less interested in schools and more interested in dams because those dams end up being a vital source for the rest of the country downstream, especially Punjab. Now, here's the issue. Recently, because of Operation Sindoor and the Indian, not threat, but the Indian action of abeyance of the Indus Waters Treaty, these areas are becoming more and more water scarce, as well as because of the lack of data sharing after the abeyance, there's been more and more volatility in these areas. We recently saw floods down country in the AP province that the Pakistanis are fearing that the next war with India will not be over the JAAC crossing over, or will not be over an attack in Mumbai. It'll be about water. And thus, the control of the military on this side, on the Pakistani side, over the legislatures, over overall government institutions, is harshening.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad we discussed the Indus Waters Treaty because, of course, I had it in my notes and you mentioned it. Before I ask you, the global reaction to this and the strange contradiction and another sort of ironic situation that here is a Pakistan that also claims to be the mediator in this unending war between Iran and United States and Israel. And, inside domestically to its own people, it's sort of doing what it is doing. So I am going to ask you about that and the global posture, etc. But before that, let's discuss the China factor a little bit better. Because the CPEC, which is usually in news because of the instability in Balochistan and Gwadar, actually starts, from China and then enters Pakistan. And it's that very region, that it's entering. So it from Western China through the Gilgit-Baltistan, then Punjab, Sindh, and then Gwadar. And if I am not wrong, then CPEC, when it was announced, it also, I think the Gilgit-Baltistan region also had the lion's share of all the investments and, infrastructure projects and all that. I mean, I haven't really looked at the updated data because they recently, your government launched a CPEC 2.0. So that's a different thing. I mean, we are not getting into semantics, but just to sort of understand the China question a little bit better, what do you think is the Chinese posture there, and why are the Chinese interested in investing there? We know the strategic reasons, but considering the instability, so where is this going, and your thoughts on the CPEC?
So China has invested in the mouth and the tail of the Pakistani length of geography. So the mouth of CPEC starts right, as you pointed out, in Gilgit-Baltistan on the Kashmir border. And that's where the whole point is to start and augment the Pakistan-China economic corridor, or CPEC. Mm-hmm. The issue is that for years, Pakistan, one of the world's highest highways and a very strategic connection between Pakistan and China already exists with the Karakoram Highway, which is there as well. Yeah. But that's just one road. It's beautiful. Almost, some engineers call it the eighth wonder of the world. But it is, I'm not sure about that, but it's quite a marvel. It's also a testament to Pak-Sino friendship, because almost 10,000 Pakistanis and Indian and Chinese were killed making that road. That goes all the way back to the 60s. But anywho, forget the history lesson. They wanted to make this more than the Karakoram because of the importance of trade, especially for China's western regions. So they started investing in GB, and then they started investing in Balochistan, which is supposed to where its ends, and the Gwadar port, where then China would send out its bits and pieces of exports to the world, and as well as receive Middle Eastern oil and other energy supplies. That was the point of CPEC, to short-circuit China's long route to the Arabian Sea, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, etc. That was the strategic purpose. But they had to connect them and build everything in the middle. Unfortunately, the lion's share, which, by the way, went to Balochistan, didn't work. And the Pakistani military could not provide the security for the development of Balochistan, especially Gwadar. Chinese interests were and are still threatened there. And there's an increasing number of insurgents active there. As for the other side, the Gilgit-Baltistan side, same. Less violence, but still saw violence. The TTP was operating there, not the Baloch, but the TTP, the Pashtun-linked, Taliban-linked Pakistani Taliban insurgency, they operated there. They targeted Chinese infrastructure and support there as well. So the Chinese pulled out slowly, and almost a couple of years ago, they really put the brakes on because the Pakistanis weren't delivering. They didn't have the capacity to, and it even seemed the will to secure Chinese investments. But the CPEC story continues, and now in CPEC 2.0. And coming to its new strategic importance, and this is quite critical, because the Pakistanis now have a pretty sour relationship with the Afghans, the Taliban government there. Recently, the only interesting thing that has happened is that the Pakistanis have opened up straight, instead of opening up routes from Afghanistan into Central Asia, they've opened up routes via Kashmir, via China into Central Asia. So there actually are new roadworks there, which are quite interesting. So the Chinese and the Pakistanis are still developing those areas. I would say that the pace, considering 10 years ago or 12 years ago when it all started, the pace, the finances have really slowed down remarkably, primarily because China is pretty sick and tired of investing in a Pakistan that either doesn't have the will or the capacity to deliver security and infrastructure.
Right. But a related question to that is that does it also then, this prolonged unrest and also the manner in which it is, starting to sort of impact all these aspirations, does it also make a case for like a heightened security posture by Beijing in the region? I mean, like a heightened security footprint or something like that. I mean, do you foresee a situation like that?
So for years, there's been a lot of speculation. In fact, I remember doing a story for India Today several years ago because there was a lot of chatter about the Chinese asking for the pound of flesh in Gwadar and saying that they want a strategic naval presence there. They don't just want their cargo vessels there. They actually want their ships there. They actually want their subs there. They might actually even want a base there. And I remember talking to the then Quetta Corps commander and confirming this. And he said there are parts of the Chinese military which have this idea, but overall we have rejected this. It's not going to happen on my watch, he famously said. There's a very famous general, very famous Corps commander there. But anyways, the Pakistan army was quite wary of allowing China a proper military presence in Gwadar, even though it was demanded. That was about a decade ago. That's because Pakistan's always tried to balance the Americans, because that would have made the Americans very nervous if there's Chinese ships and subs and frigates, sailing around the mouth of the Persian Gulf, which is where Gwadar is. But that went away. That was about a decade ago. But then recent reports have emerged that the Chinese have shown interest there again. That's important. That's after almost a decade of silence. But more importantly, because of increased insurgency and increased terror activity against Chinese infrastructure and Chinese engineers, Chinese personnel, even Chinese diplomats, the Chinese have said, hey, if you can't handle securing us, and they've tried, they've made a dedicated brigade in Balochistan, in Gwadar, called the 404. They've made a dedicated police unit all across major cities in Pakistan to just protect our Chinese friends, but nothing's working. So the Chinese have said, listen, bro, if you can't do this, let us do it, right? Listen, Iron Brother. So they're having, that story was leaked about a year and a half ago. So there's this awkward moment where the Chinese are like, if you can't do it, we'll do it. We'll send in troops to protect our engineers and our projects and our factories and our roadworks, because we're putting in billions here and you're not delivering. So Pakistani said, no, don't worry about it. We got you. This is going to be embarrassing that the Chinese security is on the ground protecting Chinese investors, workers, engineers, personnel, diplomats. The Pakistani said, no, we can't let that happen. And that was quite embarrassing. And after that, attacks on Chinese personnel and infrastructure have decreased overall in the country since last year. But overall, the general attack and insurgency have almost doubled in quantum across Pakistan.
Oh, interesting.
And they blame you guys for it. They blame the Indians for it.
I mean, we know we are familiar with that allegation all the time. In fact, your defense minister, Khwaja Asif, went, to the extent of actually saying that these are the protesters the protesters are basically enemies like India. So, and I think that we're no strangers to this kind of a thing.
Yeah, which is, by the way, complete BS. Because if the JAAC protesters are Indian agents, what were you doing negotiating with them for the last 2 years?
2 years. Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah. Wajahat, I know you're sort of running out of time, but I have to ask you these 2-3 questions before I wrap up. One is that there is also perception that all this massive brutal crackdown against the protesters, against the JAAC in Pakistan is not really garnering the same kind of global attention, regarding the global media and the way it is covered, etc. Do you share that assessment? And if so, why?
Yeah, so the Pakistani media, as I just did a live on this, the Pakistani media is effectively destroyed. It has. I left Pakistan around 2019 when I saw the beginning of the end, and it seems like today it's ended. People do take to social media, journalists and influencers and reporters do, but overall the mainstream's gone. I just, in fact, did an analysis of the country's top 3 newspapers on my show, showing their front pages, back pages, websites. Nothing. It's as if this violence has happened on another planet and not in Pakistan or Pakistani administered Kashmir. But unfortunately, even global media has been slow on the uptake. I feel Al Jazeera, The Wires, and The Times here in New York, they've covered it, but overall there's less interest. People are more interested in Pakistan's other role, which Donald Trump's favorite field marshal is playing in terms of mediating the conflict with Iran. Pakistan, when it has more value to Western interests, that's when it makes the headlines here. A bunch of villagers and farmers being shot in the streets of Rawalakot. It's not quite sexy for an American or a global audience, I guess.
Yeah, very well put, Wajahat. I mean, I don't think anybody could have put it better. My last question to you is that where do you see this is going? And if you remember, the discussion that we had earlier, I had suggested the scenarios. I mean, do you believe that there are like a couple of scenarios to watch? What is the best case to worst case? Your views on that.
So the Pakistani military has an interesting habit. They're very thick-skinned. And they're very proud of being thick-skinned. In fact, there's an old saying which an old British historian once said, and I think it applies to the army, that the only thing more difficult than putting a new idea into an army, the only thing more difficult than putting a new idea into an army is taking an old idea out of it. So the army, all armies, not just ours, but yours, in fact, all of them are quite conservative. These boys, usually mostly boys, are quite not very progressive, and that's why they stay disciplined and turn up to work and even go do what they do every day. And they do some brave work. All militaries across the world risk life and limb to do what they do. But the Pakistan army is a little different because it traces a lot of these problems are traced back to its traditions with the Brits. With the British Indian Army, and unfortunately, the habits of ruling and dealing go more in line with those old habits that they seem to have possessed and actually been handed over than the Indian Army. For some reason, the Indians have kept the nicer parts, the Indian Army, like the same regimental colors and the songs and the ties and the silver. But the Indian Army has managed to forget the badmashi, the colonialism, the imperialism of our white masters. But the Pakistani Army seems to be very, very proud of it. In fact, you might notice, in fact, I encourage you and your Indian viewers to go and study. The first thing, one of the first things the Indian Army did after partition was to change its uniform from khaki to dark green, which is the official uniform. It wasn't that. They changed the color. That's a big deal, right? It wasn't for fashion. It was to say, hey, we've changed now. We're up. We're a different army. This is the Indian Army. This is not a British Indian Army. There's also a bunch of other changes where I'm not going to bore you with. Pakistanis didn't change a thing. Not a thing. From the uniform to the div patches, clearly to the way they run things. What I find strange is that these men who run about 35,000 officers, about 700,000 men, and about 29, 30 generals who basically run the country and run the army, I think what they seem to forget, and this is critical, that A, they've just handed India a very good case of redemption for Kashmir. B, the Pakistani people have for generations been told that Kashmir is Pakistan's share rug. It's our jugular vein. So this is an issue which really This is not Balochistan, huh? This is, nobody cares about the Baloch. Out there in the mountains, eating their goats and, running around in the mountains. Who cares? And this is not KP, out there in the mountains, shooting their guns and smoking chars. There's stereotypes about the periphery, about Pakistan. That's why nobody's scared about the western provinces and their insurgency. But this is not a western province. This is Kashmir. And everything for decades, politically, militarily, defense-wise, we've been told, listen, we must starve because one day we will go and take Kashmir from these damn Indians. That's the narrative, right? And they didn't just tell me this. They told my father this. They told my grandfather this. They told everybody this. They told women this, men this. They told the army this. They told the civilians this. They told the Shia, Sunnis, Hindus, Harik, right? So this is so this is not the Baloch and the BS and the Pathans and their BS. This is serious. So premised on that, the Pakistan army seems to have finally overstepped. These are not the Bengalis who can be lost. This is not the Baloch who can be crushed and shut down in the mountains. This is Kashmir. This is serious. And thus, this is a different sort of crisis. But the army must finally remember, especially Asim Munir, that every time this subcontinent has been over-federated, it's reacted. Akbar, who the great Mughal ruler, oversaw the apex of his empire because he married Rajputs and made them generals and conducted Pandits in the middle of his own court. He made a very eclectic government. That was the apex of the Mughal Empire. His great-grandson screwed it up because he was a radical and he wanted to control the peripheries, and they reacted because of his new laws. Aurangzeb wasn't eclectic. You have to be eclectic. And that's why even the Brits, when the Brits, the beginning of their end was the Jallianwala Bagh and the roll attack, which is when all of this started. That's when Gandhiji's non-cooperation movement started. And that's when Tagore threw his knighthood in the Brits' face. And that's when Bhagat Singh came up because of Jallianwala Bagh and the hundreds of people killed there. And again, the roll attack was, unlike other acts, it was very like, we can go pick up anybody, anytime, anywhere, shut it all down. So whenever you have these national suppression, strong federation laws, which is the way Pakistan's heart state, Asim Munir calls this the heart state, the way it's running, whether it's Aurangzeb or the Brits, there's pushback. And Pakistan is seeing the same cycle that it saw 500 years ago under the Mughals and 100 years ago under the Brits. That's where we're at. And if Asim Munir and other people around him don't understand this, then guess what? At least we do. So, yeah.
Right. So you do you see a potential of some sort of a negotiation to revive, some sort of a recalibration, considering all the all the elaboration that you just gave me, or do you think that there's been further radicalization in the people because of the angst and because of the brutal crackdown?
I'm quite hopeful because this army has a very interesting habit, Swasti. This army. The only thing that can control the army seemingly has been the army. And every time an army general or an army strategy has sort of overreached or backfired, they've been pretty good at making what they call in their language course correction. They're very good at course correction. When Ayub Khan signed a weak treaty with Lal Bahadur Shastri in Tashkent after the 65 war, he was gone within 4 years. He was done. They said, sir, time for you to retire, right? And they used Bhutto and the students for that. They didn't stop it. They could have, they didn't. When Yahya Khan had made the biggest mistake of Pakistan's military history and lost East Pakistan, they said, sir, time for you to take a break. When Ziaul Haq was becoming a Khalifa, developing nuclear weapons, and frankly, he was sort of done serving his purpose for the American establishment. They said, sir, time for you to take a flight and not land, which is what happened in 1988 with his plane blowing up. When Musharraf was trying to make too many friends at the same time, hanging out with Manmohan Singh and trying to, solve Kashmir, trying to bring Benazir Bhutto back, and becoming a fervent ally of Condoleezza Rice and working with the National Security Administration of the Americans. He was said, sir, maybe you should move to Dubai and firstly take your uniform off. And that's exactly what happened. So every time the Pakistani military's chief, the Pakistan Army chief, sort of overstepped, sort of done his job, sort of become a liability, become too expensive to maintain, they suggest retirement or worse.
Right. On that note, I have to really, thank you, Wajahat, for this really sort of, deep, profound, insightful overview of what is going on. It is deeply worrying. It is tragic. It is also dangerous for so many reasons. And I hope that some way out comes sooner than later. But I have to thank you for taking the time out. It was a pleasure having you. And you keep watching WorldView with Swasti.
Swasti, it was a real pleasure. Very good listener. Thanks for indulging me. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.